Aircraft ownership, the good, the bad, and the unusual. Welcome to the Stuck Mic AvCast. My name is Carl Valerian. I'm your host today. We're going to talk about aircraft ownership, but a little bit different than most conversations. Of course, we're going to talk about the good and the bad, but we're also going to talk about the unusual experiences based on our experiences as far as ownership, and also maybe something that happened that was you felt unusual during the process. We're going to ask our co-host to talk about that. I'm here in Lakeland, Florida. Joining me is Bill English. Where are you, Bill, today?
Well, as usual, in the frozen Northern Virginia right now, finally digging out of our polar vortex.
Polar vortex. Well, welcome, and not much flying going on because it's the wheels are kind of solidly frozen.
The patch is a bunch of ice ruts here. I am not loving it.
Well, also joining us somewhere north in the cold weather is Leslie. Welcome. Leslie, where are you today?
Hey, everyone. Hey, Carl. I am in Bentonville, Arkansas.
Bentonville, well, welcome. And Tom Frick, I think you are in sunny Florida. You're back in Florida?
I am. I'm back in sunny Florida.
Awesome.
How y'all doing tonight?
Great. It's actually wonderful to have everybody on because this is something we're all passionate about is owning aircraft. But first, let's start with the pre-flight checklist. Well, before we get started, the most important thing is to actually, recognize people that have done things that I think that are, outstanding, different, and maybe some of the awards maybe you've gotten. Write us at stuckmicavcast@gmail.com. But two of our hosts did something really exciting. They actually were both nominated for two different things. So I'm going to start with Bill English. Bill actually is one of the recipients of an award from the Flight Training Experience Awards that AOPA comes out with every year. And then in 2025 actually was one of the recipients of that. And there is more. So Bill, tell us a little bit about that award and what it means, and also what's unique about your receiving in your school.
Yeah. Thanks, Carl. The AOPA Flight Training Experience Awards has been going on for quite a few years. This year, they revamped the process, did it a little bit different. What they're looking for with this award is to get a feel from students, customers of flight schools and flight training about the whole experience. They want to recognize, focus on comprehensive picture of the flight training experience. This year, things were a little bit different than most surveys where people just check boxes. Here, they were looking for feedback where the respondents, the students and the customers, they had to actually write. They had to take some time and write and talk about their schools. And you know what? I'm not too proud to say that we pretty much here at Big Red Flight School had a red wave. Every one of our 5 locations, every chief of those locations, 28% of the CFIs from the entire country are from our flight school this year. And best CFI for the Eastern region, I'm proud to say, is one of my daughters. We know about the daughters at the Leesburg location. As best flight instructor, I'll call her out by name, Madison Nugent. Awesome flight instructor. She's top in the Eastern region. And we are all just rooting and crossing our fingers for her as best flight instructor of the entire country. That's going to be announced at the Redbird Migration. March, was it 4th and 5th, early March in Denver will be the Redbird Migration Conference. You'll hear all about that. And we're rooting for our Madison for that.
Outstanding. Great job, Bill, and also everybody else at the Big Red Flight School there. That's what he meant by the red wave. And that's actually terrific. I mean, hats off to you, and it says something about what you guys do and what you've done with the school there. Also, another award happened recently, and that was an award to Leslie Cobble, and that was actually a scholarship, and that was from the Hart Foundation for a Fuel from the Hart scholarship. We've had people on the show before that have actually received a similar one, but this is one that's going to the commercial multi-engine add-on rating. So, Leslie, tell us a little bit about that, and also congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. Hart Flying is a nonprofit foundation, and their goal and their mission is to advance women in aviation, kind of raise that 6% of women who are pilots. And they do that through raising money, through donations, through sponsorships and partnerships. to give women scholarships towards their flight training. And also, they have special events to promote STEM education and show young girls that there is a wide opportunity for careers in STEM careers and STEM jobs, not just being a pilot, but in other areas as well. So these are all things that I am personally passionate about. And I decided, you know what, I could use a little help with my training. I'm hoping to get my commercial multi-engine add-on training and my CFII training done this spring or early summer. So every little bit helps. So I put my name in the hat and filled out it was a lengthy application process and just very blessed to have some funds going towards that training.
Absolutely, and I tell you, hats off to you, congratulations, and it was really exciting for me to see that. The other exciting part is that we're going to have you on to talk about your experience getting your multi-engine rating. I know we talked about it before, but I would love to hear about the process, so take good notes.
Yeah,
I'm really excited about it.
I would really love to go out and have Bill instruct me.
Yeah,
That would be a dream.
absolutely. So maybe we could get that together. That'd be really cool. That'd be awesome.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Well, again, congratulations to both of you, Bill and Leslie. We're really proud to have you on the podcast, and hats off to you for those awards. And again, at Redbird, they're going to have the award ceremony or the announcement and awards at Migration. That's going to be actually in Denver, Colorado this year, March 4th through the 5th. I know it's just a couple days from now when this comes out. Let's move on to the cruise flight. Well, today, again, we're talking about aircraft ownership, the good, the bad, and the unusual. And the first thing I want to talk about, and it goes along with the good and the bad, is the reasons to buy and the reasons not to buy. And then we'll kind of dive into the types of ownerships, and then move on to some other things that we make mistakes on when we do. And we all made mistakes when we've bought an airplane or become a partner, etc. And then we'll move on to something else, the things that we've had happen that were somewhat unusual or something we found unusual about the experience of owning an aircraft. But I'll start off with the whole reasons to buy, not to buy. One of the things that I think is absolutely terrific is the fact that, and this is right now probably the most important thing to me as a personally in my aviation journey right now, is the freedom to fly. So the access to an airplane 24 hours. And I know, when I had the plane here, Tom and I used to go out anytime we want. We used to hang out at the hangar and say, hey, where are we going to go? Oh, let's go fly down Okeechobee and see my aunt. That type of freedom of being able to get into your vehicle that goes through the air and takes you somewhere. It's like a magic carpet. And that's really my number one thing right now. Number two for me is the ability to share aviation with others. And I think that is something that we have to do is really define what our goal is when we're actually buying an aircraft. So really, one of the things when you're looking at reasons to buy is look into, what's the purpose. And when you have that purpose defined well, then you can go out and look at the actual aircraft. And that comes up with a lot of other things as far as type of airplanes and that type of thing. And somebody that has owned quite a few different airplanes, I know Leslie, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about this, is when you're looking at types of aircrafts in your schools and et cetera, what has been some of your biggest reasons for purchasing or not buying a certain aircraft?
Well, our decision, we've had two flight schools, one in Arkansas, one in Hawaii, and we've just started another small one here in Northwest Arkansas. And for us, our personal experience, it's kind of what we walked into. So we started this whole journey where John and his brother purchased a Cessna 172. And then it just kind of expanded from there. And we found out, and we were brand new, first time aircraft owners, and we started learning the things about, when we get a second or a third aircraft, having, like parts, and, we're able to have the same alternators, the same vacuum pumps, the same tires, you name it, on the shelf. And so when one aircraft goes down, it's a quick turnaround because we already have it, or we can swap it out. And also it afforded an easier transition from aircraft to aircraft for our students. Now, we did learn that a little bit the hard way during our first flight school because our second aircraft we purchased was a Piper Arrow. So we had that complex element to it as well. And then we're talking about, for the most part, a lot of different parts. Then we went to Hawaii, fast forward, and we had a Cessna 172. Then we made the decision with our business partner there, we were going to keep it in that Cessna 172 line. We narrowed it even down further to we only had M or N models, and we tried to stay within the same voltage, tried to stay within the same type of engine. That funnel narrowed down a lot more with that. So for us, that was, learning from our first, not mistakes, but just experience. We learned a lot having that first flight school and all of our different aircraft in Arkansas the first go around.
And that's something you would consider, say you were starting a club, is that if you're going to do something like this and have more than one aircraft, maybe things that can be shared. I know one of the first clubs I went into, we had totally different airplanes, all sorts of different aircraft that luckily we had somebody that was there at the airport. That was their hobby, was maintenance. So that was kind of cool. Without that, I'm not sure I would have gone into something with that many different aircraft, although it was kind of cool.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's something that you need to talk amongst yourself or amongst your partners. Because, the flip side of that, the pro of having all the different aircraft is you have all these different offerings. And that's a great sales and marketing point. And you could cast a wider net of clients with that. So, I mean, who knows? There's pros and cons to both approaches to it, I think.
Absolutely. And if you have somebody that's willing to be the maintenance manager, I think it's perfect. It's just one of those things that you have to have someone that's very, coordinated, and and also somebody that can actually, coordinate the maintenance, etc. But the other part of this too is, the different types of aircraft, but also the cost and utilization. Before I get into that, I know, Tom, you had some thoughts on, reasons that you really felt you might not want to purchase an aircraft.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was completely just reasons why I wouldn't buy an aircraft, but just in my path, I took my discovery flight. I was looking at it earlier. It was like, 2009. So was it 16 years ago now? And, originally when I started flying, I was a complete trade plane and controller geek. I was looking at all of these airplanes. I was bound and determined I wanted to go buy an airplane. And I went in and it was like just thumbing through all this stuff and dreaming and, trying to finagle and get money and figure it out and how I was going to do this, learn as much as I could. And it never happened. I just kept getting ratings and getting ratings. And to this day, I still have never owned an airplane. It's like, it's funny. It's just, it's been, to me, it's by going through and getting the ratings that I've had, it's been more available to fly other people's airplanes. It's been easier for me to go find a flight school and be able to rent airplanes, I worked for a flight school for a while. I had, I think it was 26 different aircraft at my disposal, and then I was also part of other flight schools in the area as well and was able to use their airplanes. I'm signed off in, I think four flight schools in my area here. And, there's got to be 40 or 50 aircraft that are available at any given time. I say available because, the training business down here has actually been really good. And that's the problem is I'm finding it hard to rent aircraft because they're so busy with students all the time. But I go down a completely different road with that one. So it's not so much that I would say I have a reason not to buy, just never had the need to because, I've worked for people that let me fly their planes and, and teaching with people in their planes. And I've never had the need to actually go and purchase one.
Yeah, you have one of the best benefits. You know people with airplanes.
Indeed.
And lots of them, and are able to go up and fly in them. I think that's actually terrific. I mean, just, one thing I'd like to add to that, Tom, I know you and I know what you've done with people. You're out there flying in all sorts of different airplanes, a Cirrus one day, 182 another day, 172. That's really cool.
Indeed.
Yes, so that's a definite bonus.
And then throw in there the high performance stuff, and then a jet every now and then, and
yeah,
I see a lot of different seats.
Yeah, life is good, that's for sure. Another thing to talk about when you're talking about the whole purchasing or not purchasing, to buy or not to buy, is your cost. And that can also be included in the utilization of the aircraft, cost and utilization. A lot of people, there's rules of thumb You'll hear like people say, well, if you're going to use it 100 hours, you should think about actually buying your own, even 150. I think it all depends on the type of airplane that you're flying, because that number can go down, especially if the cost is low. But as the cost gets higher and higher, it does go up a little bit. And it's interesting that just doing the math on a spreadsheet really does help. So that's one of the things that is really important, is to figure out whether you should or should not buy, should be that cost-benefit analysis, and doing that on a spreadsheet. And that's something that I kind of wish I did. And that's really, I feel, some of the things I didn't look into in the past. But with all that said, one of the reasons to buy, in my mind, is that don't be afraid to buy, because you can always sell. I don't know how many. At one time, I had access to maybe 4 or 5 airplanes. I bought lots of different partnerships. You can always sell those. But with that said, make sure you have an exit strategy. Not that you're going to exit right away, but make sure you know how you're going to be able to sell that. And if you're about to buy into something, like I was looking at a complex, a 210, know that when you go to sell a 210, or you're not going to have as many people as, say, a Cherokee. The audience is going to get smaller, in other words. Just realize the fact that that's going to happen. And I think that's really, really important. But yeah, that's really, really important there. Bill, how about you? I know you have there's a lot of experience with your flight school as far as different aircraft. How many different types do you have, by the way? Do you know?
Yeah, I got a couple of things to mention here. On the flight school end, to be honest with you, across all of our 5 locations, I don't know if I can tell you all the types we have. I've been, over the last couple of years, expanding the fleet at the cow pasture. And to go just right with what Leslie said, we try to keep things with some commonality, not just for maintenance, but also just the commonality of the aircraft for training. So we've got largely a Cessna fleet that steps up. So you can start in an older N model, moving on up through a more sophisticated 172. We've got a 182 with almost the identical avionics package, so people can move up with minimal transition. I've pretty much just reached critical mass on my Piper fleet as well, so you can move up from a basic Warrior up into Archers, and then move on to a Cherokee 6 down in Manassas. So we have the same thing with the Diamonds. You can go DA-20, DA-40, move into the Twin Star. So you can kind of move your way up, which helps the students with their training and their transition. Don't have a lot of unicorns. I purposely did that. A lot of people think about a flight school or a club and say, oh, get this cool airplane. Well, now I need to get my instructors checked out on it. You need to keep currency on it. So it gets a little bit more complicated. So now I'm managing, which is probably a lot, but managing 3 different tracks. But if I threw something else in there, it's difficult. I do have one other twin that's a bit of a unicorn. So we try to do that. That helps out the student as well. They get a nice progression in their training. As far as owning my own airplane, you just mentioned that about selling. So we've talked about it on the show before a few years ago. I bought an airplane that was a traveling airplane. We thought that was the mission, the Comfort Slug, the Beach Sierra. Flew that for a while, and I realized that I don't really go anywhere. And my wife really doesn't care to go anywhere. And she said, you know what? You and your buddies, you like flying old airplanes off the grass strips and everything. Just have your fun. And I basically even up traded. I mean, the Comfort Slug, I sold it for what I bought it for. And I bought Sasquatch for the same amount of money. So basically just even up swapped. And now I have exactly the mission that I want. And most importantly, happy wife, happy life. Right?
Absolutely.
Right. So my airplane meets my mission perfectly. What I like to do is, me and my cronies flying around on little grass strips and playing with antique airplanes. We'll talk about antique airplanes later in the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to that, as far as how do you, I don't know if this is important to you in aircraft ownership, but how do you come up with the names of your airplane?
Sasquatch just named itself. It's got big feet that lives in the woods. I mean, what else are you going to call it, right?
I'm teasing. But it is so funny listening to all the different names you come
We
up
name
with
all
for
at
airplanes.
Big Red Flight School.
That's
I
hilarious.
name a bunch of our airplanes. We've got the donkey and the Pepsi can, and oh yeah, come on by. We got names for everything.
Absolutely. You know, there's something that you mentioned towards the end there, and that's kind of what I want to talk about as far as just to conclude on what, to buy or not to buy. And that's what Tom has said in the past, and that's something that I always tell people, and that's generally, Tom, mission, right? And that is the biggest thing. What are you going to do with this airplane? And then go out and find that airplane and talk to people. And that's the biggest thing. There's tons of YouTube videos out there. I mean, that's what I do. I mean, when people ask me what aviation videos I watch, to be honest with you, it's just like when I want to find out about an area, I watch real estate videos. When I want to find out about airplanes, I watch sales videos. That's all I do. I mean, when I'm looking at airplanes, absolutely love watching sales videos that are out there. As a matter of fact, we're going to have one of them on the show, but there's some really terrific videos. You learn so much about an airplane and the pluses and minuses from those sales videos. So go check those out. But mission, you'll find out the mission a lot of times within those videos. Let's move on to not just the buy or not buy. And again, mission is a big part of that. That is the number one thing, mission, just like location. But for me, I've done both the sole ownership, partnership, and club. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits there. And also look at the flight school club. And that's something I want to talk a little bit about, because that's something a little bit different. People don't look at their flight school as a club, but there are some flight schools that separate aircraft as a club, but there's also sometimes they call it a club and it's not. Bill, do you do anything like that at your school?
No, not really. We've got sort of a discount program. It's not really a club. I do know some schools that are set up that way, and they call it a club, but it really is just a gussied up discount program. Although there are some I haven't had that much experience with that are more of a club sort of arrangement, and you can morph into clubs whose purpose is flight training. So there's a bit of a whole gradient there.
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at the purchasing an airplane as sole ownership and partnership, a lot of times we look at an airplane that we fall in love with, right? But we can't afford it. Well, a way to get around that is ask like a couple other people to go in on it. And when you actually go in partnership with one other person, the cost's half, and that's pretty incredible. And there is a happy medium, maybe 2, 3, 4 partners. Once you get to 5 or 6, it becomes more like a club. So that's where your shift in mentality, I find, happens after 3. Really, that's when things start in my mind going towards a club, and that's fine. It's just that you need to have that mentality when you're going into it, when you're setting that up, is say to yourself, if I'm going to have a whole bunch of people in this, I need to make this a club. Maybe think about even bringing on more aircraft. But when you are the sole owner of an aircraft, you know all the costs. You don't argue with other people. You say, hey, listen, I'm going to have this airplane. I want this avionics. I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. And I have total control over that, which I think that's really, really important, is to have the fact that it, for me personally, is to be able to do whatever I want with the airplane. If that's not a big deal, then partnerships are great, and some can be absolutely terrific. I know, Tom, you know a few people that are in partnerships right now. If I'm mistaken, let me know.
No, I do, and it's funny how you start thinking about the cost of an airplane. It's like you go in there and look and say, okay, what can I afford? And I find this nice, pretty airplane that I get, and I was like, okay, that's within my budget. But then you start adding on all the other things you need to think about. How am I going to maintain this aircraft? Where am I going to keep this aircraft? How, what's it going to do when it's not in use? And, how am I going to cover those costs when the inevitable is going to happen? It's an airplane. Something's going to break. It's going to happen. So with those thoughts in mind, so when as far as partnerships are concerned, is trying to put a schedule together to try to make something like that happen. I know one of the groups I know that own an airplane, they specifically pay each other per hour of use for maintenance costs. They have a predetermined amount per hour that they have, and whenever they take the plane out, they'll pay a rental cost. They'll pay either a wet fee or a dry fee and pay for their own gas, and then they'll pay for maintenance costs on top of it as part of paying for that aircraft, as part of the partnership agreement, and it adds to the expenditure. So it's not just the cost of the airplane that's involved here. So it's just one of the considerations I was thinking of.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the other thing too, when you're owning an airplane, is you wind up having friends with airplanes. I know last time I'm looking at the hangar out my window here, had a lot of the people around that said, "Hey, why don't you go fly my airplane sometime?" And a lot of times, what happens is they say, "Hey, you know, here's the keys. Go ahead and go fly it." And make sure you're comfortable with it. Make sure you know the airplane. That's another thing too, is that a lot, and I think Bill, you can comment on this. A lot of people that are in that community around you are willing to give you their keys. Just make sure you can fly the plane, whatever plane that is, and make sure you get checked out. As a matter of fact, right before this, I just heard a horror story about somebody grabbing the keys from somebody on an aircraft and did not understand the fuel system. I'm just going to leave it at that. And that was a very traumatic experience because it was my friend that went up in this airplane. And because they didn't know the fuel system, they wound up having to do an emergency landing, which kind of was not good. So make sure if you're going to borrow the keys, you know that airplane, you get checked out. And I know, you know, that's one thing I know, Bill, when I always listen to you talk about the patch, you're always talking about, hey, whoever's plane's at the front of the hangar, that's what we're flying. I think that's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
we do. I mean, we're pretty, you know, it's a small group of people. We're close. We know each other's airplanes. So, and yeah, we do, you know, certainly as an instructor, say, you know, you don't want to just be jumping into something that you don't know or you're not comfortable with. And, you know, so we get that. But that is true. As an aircraft owner, you definitely will get into that network of, you know, wherever you are. You know, it might be a little field like we've got up there that's, you know, more, you know, close knit. Wherever you are, you're going to meet other airplane owners, and that's going to expand your experience, which is kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely is. Leslie, did you have a club? I can't remember. Was that, or did you guys have like just a rental?
Oh, we just had we made our planes available for rental through our flight school, but as the other guys mentioned, we did offer, you know, different discounts. There was not like a membership, so to speak, but you could, you know, if you paid a certain deposit, then you get a little bit off your rental rate. I did want to kind of piggyback on what Tom and Bill were just talking about and add on insurance considerations. And our friend Victoria Newville, if she was on here, she would say, make sure before you take somebody else's keys that you have properly and fully covered yourself. You've got to cross every T, dot every I. And I tell you, you know, there's been a couple of instances where, you know, some of our flight school owned aircraft, you know, one of our instructors would hop in. Well, I'm making a story real quick. So one of our instructors back in Jonesboro, Arkansas, got in our A36 Bonanza after we had a new engine put in, and he had an engine failure in flight as he was climbing out to head back across the state. And so he put it down in a field. So it comes to find out he did not meet that open pilot warranty minimum requirements to fly that aircraft. And so the damage to the aircraft, luckily, there was minimal damage for what happened, but like the towing fees and getting it back to the maintenance shop and, you know, kind of fixing up the gear, busted tire, things like that was out of our own pocket because he did not meet that open pilot warranty. And here he was you know, he was a flight instructor with 700 hours. But he was not properly covered and rated to fly that. Well, he was rated, but not properly covered to fly that plane. So just make sure that, you know, whether it's getting a non-owned insurance policy before you rent somebody's plane or being a named pilot on that insurance policy, make sure you're covered.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and that was kind of going to be moving into some of the common mistakes that people make when they do purchase an airplane is the fact that they don't realize that they can't get covered for insurance. Hopefully, the people that are either selling you or selling you a partnership in that airplane will tell you, hey, first look for your insurance. I'm going through that with a friend of mine right now where it's a complex aircraft that they have to have 100 hours in complex. And the thought is, I'll just buy the airplane and do the training and do the time in the airplane. They can't do that. You have to make sure the insurance says you can do that. Because come to find out, they can't do the training in the airplane they bought. So now they got to go and rent a plane, a complex airplane, and get 100 hours in another airplane. They can't use the airplane except as a passenger with one of the other people that own it. that was like, oh man, that's a bummer. That is a real bummer. So you don't want that to happen. So as far as sole ownership and partnership, we talked about cost control, availability. We even talked about that, as far as the benefits. But I think one of the things I really want to touch on and really concentrate on is some of those big mistakes. And Leslie, I'm so glad you brought up the insurance part of this. And that is something that surprised me with the first few airplanes I was involved with, either as a shareholder, partner, et cetera, is the cost of the insurance to do certain things. For instance, say I want to instruct, like my 182 that I had, that one I couldn't teach in. And I'm like, why can't I teach in it? And I could teach in it. I could get insurance to teach in it, but then I could only teach people that were beyond their private pilot certificate, and they couldn't go solo. I was like, this is not going to work out. So there's certain airplanes, and it had more to do, and actually Victoria could tell you about this instance, because that was the airplane I had. You can have an airplane that they will not allow you to actually get insurance, or I shouldn't say that. They will charge you a lot of money to get insurance to fly that airplane, but it's not practical to do it. But you think that you'll be able to do any type of instruction, and you can't. So make sure you read everything in the fine print on your insurance. I can't tell you how important insurance is. And having been through, 3 losses in aircraft so far, and losses meaning not a total loss, but as a matter of fact, sometimes you think it's going to be a total and the company won't total the airplane. It's kind of crazy. But anyway, that's something that you have to look at, is make sure that in your insurance it's written as to what you're going to need to come up with money-wise, and the deductible, and what kind of operations are actually covered in that insurance. And I have a little story there, is the fact that I had an airplane where we had the open pilot policy, and someone was able to take it out. One of the other owners let someone fly it, and then they were in a rush, didn't take the tow bar off, and broke the tip of the propeller off when they started it. And the one thing that I was surprised about was not only was it the damage to the aircraft that we had to resolve, but it was damage to the hangar, where the piece of the propeller went and damaged the hangar next to us. So that was another thing we had to resolve through the insurance. But those are the kind of things you want to think about as far as common mistakes. Also, by the way, when we're talking these common mistakes, I always worry about getting too negative, because I think we're going to scare some people off here from aircraft ownership. Maybe we should. I don't know. I'm trying hard as I can to not tell people don't buy an airplane, but I do want to talk about some of these things as far as what's important in aircraft ownership. But the other thing is you really need to have a written agreement. And by the way, a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, we're not getting too deep into it, because AOPA has some incredible resources out there. I'll have links in the show notes. Really absolutely terrific. So not having a written purchase agreement is not a great idea. You can use the attorneys at AOPA. There's lots of aviation attorneys that can help you there. And not just not having that agreement. And when you get involved in something like ownership, it's almost like getting married. I mean, you really have to realize you need to have everything in writing, even if it's your best friend, because your best friend can be turned into your enemy in an aircraft ownership if things aren't written properly. So make sure you do have that written. But also, not just the purchase agreement, but also that actually written purchase agreement. But it not only having that, but doing it yourself online from these forums, that it could be poorly written, and that's where you need to really go forward with a good attorney. And I know, Leslie, you've had a lot of purchases in your life. How is it that you go about that with the purchase agreement?
Yeah, we kind of, luckily, most of the aircraft that we've bought have been through individuals or company who have been down the block before of aircraft purchasing and selling. And so they would kind of take us under their wing and kind of walk us through that process, everything from the purchase agreement to putting money in escrow and, financing, getting your insurance, all of that. So, going back to the purchase agreement, usually what we would do, we have an attorney that we work with through that particular flight school or with our partnership. And so we would bring that to the table and have him or her take a look at it and make a few changes and, just make sure the wording's right and maybe ask us questions. Hey, did you think about this aspect of it? Give us some scenarios. If this were to happen, if you decide to dissolve your company, what's going to happen to the aircraft and, percentage of ownership and, I'm kind of grabbing for questions here. But yeah, definitely get an attorney involved and get their counsel and their advice on that purchase agreement. I'll tell you what's so easy to do though, is once you get several under your belt, I think we've gone, it's not a ton, but we've purchased probably 10, 11 aircraft so far in the last 10 years that I've been flying. And once you kind of get the hang of it and you know what the purchase agreement kind of should look like, you have your template, it's so easy to pull that up and fill in the new blanks. And especially if you're buying an aircraft from somebody that you know and you trust, and you start to get a little complacent with it. So always, and same thing with the pre-buy, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute. So with your purchase agreement, your pre-buy, have the professionals give you counsel and take a look first at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to that, as far as the counsel looking at it, also at the end, make sure they review it again right before you sign. Just have anybody just reread it, because I had seen an agreement where someone had agreed to buy the N number and everything, but instead of wrote Cessna 182 and it was a Cessna 172. Little things like that. It's always good to have someone who's editing it, and that's why having an attorney or anybody to edit that's important. But the attorney should be the final review there. And since you mentioned it, the inadequate pre-buy or no pre-buy, that happens. So I have this is an interesting one. So I've gotten into partnerships without a pre-buy, and that's something else that people say, should you not get a pre-buy? And what did I do? The reason is I bought a part of a corporation that owned an aircraft, and the person that I was buying it with was a mechanic themselves. So that's where I trusted that person. But if I was buying, without that mechanic or somebody who's my own mechanic, I would definitely have a pre-buy done by somebody else besides that person. And that's where having a pre-buy, especially if you're going to be the sole owner, if you're not buying into a club, that kind of thing, is incredibly important. If you're going to get into a club that has all these airplanes, you can't really say, hey, listen, I want to pre-buy on all the airplanes, but you do want to say, hey, can I maybe even look at the books and just kind of review things here and see what you're doing as far as maintenance is concerned. And that is, I think, absolutely important. I know a lot of people have gotten into trouble with the pre-buys, but also remember this too, is that there's things that happen after the pre-buy that you don't get in the pre-buy. There's things that you don't realize, or something new could come out with that airplane after you've purchased the airplane. That happened with a friend of mine with a wing spar, and he dumped a bunch of money into his airplane. No fault of anybody, but wound up spending a lot of money there. So absolutely have to have a pre-buy. And I know James Spearman, if he was on today, he'd be telling you all about the common mistakes he's seen with people in pre-buys and what to do and what not to do. And there's a lot of ways to get the pre-buy done. And there's that whole philosophy of, should I have the annual done, or what should we do during the pre-buy? Those are things that you can discuss with your mechanic. And say, hey, listen, do you think we should just go ahead and do the annual and get that done and make that our pre-buy, or what? What should we do? And having the phone number of the mechanic and letting them have your phone number, I should say, is really important, because they're going to call you, and make sure you pick up the phone. Hey, we saw this. Oh, well, stop. I'm done. By the way, the cylinder's cracked. Yeah, I'm done. Let's talk about the new price here. Other costs, with the big mistakes we make too on other costs that people don't realize. And again, going back to usage and that kind of thing, is taxes, downs, hangars. Those are all different costs to have a hangar. Like where I am here, my cost here is about 75% more than my cost, which is about 150 yards that way. So with 150 yards cost me a lot more, or hundreds of dollars more, depending where I want my airplane. Do I want in my office, where I go from air conditioning to airplane, or do I want to have to go walk outside to my airplane? So just make sure you look at those costs. Also, use of the airplane. If you're thinking of doing any type of flight instructing in the airplane or allowing flight instruction, make sure you talk to your airport, and make sure you find out from that airport if you're allowed to do anything, any type of instructing in that plane. Find out if you can do your own oil changes. I know that was some consternation at one of the airports I was at, where we were doing our own oil changes, and they said, no, you can't do that. Big argument happened as to whether we're doing maintenance on the aircraft, that type of thing. Those are some big things, because you want to have a good relationship with the airport, and that can make things go sideways fairly quickly. So those are taxes, insurance, tie downs, hangars. Another thing to think about, since we're in the United States, we're located close to a lot of different countries. If you're buying a plane with a different registration, Bahamas, Mexico, Canada especially, you see a lot of planes in Canada, make sure you understand that you have to be able to get that plane to the United States. And if it's a registered airplane there, you're going to have to go get yourself a pilot to bring it down that's actually a Canadian pilot. Or you just, change the registration. It's actually, there's companies that do that, but it can cost you a lot more money than you realize when you're actually moving an airplane around. So that's really important. As far as mistakes, as far as when purchasing the aircraft, I think the biggest one is the pre-buy and also the actual written agreement, and that's all I can think of there. Anybody else have any other things that they wanted to mention on that, as far as anything on the pre-buy and other mistakes? There's also the other part of this too that I forgot to mention is how do you structure that? Go to AOPA. Most people put it in a corporation or some LLC, and that's how they structure having that aircraft. It's either, usually a lot of people don't buy it within their own name, and usually for liability reasons. Again, we're going back to the whole thing. You talk to an attorney. So those are the good, the bad, and also the unusual. We talked about common mistakes. The unusual part is what I want to get into now. As far as, aircraft and some of the things that you found, and I want to kind of go around. I'll start, since I didn't let any of you know this beforehand. Something that was unusual about aircraft ownership, that you found was unusual about aircraft ownership. I'd like you to share that, or something that was unusual that happened during aircraft ownership, and I'll kind of get started, and so I'll be. This is gonna. I hate to admit this mistake, but when I first got into my first club, I think it was Bill was talking about the unicorns. We had a Mooney right in that club. They got rid of the Mooney. Someone ran it off the runway into the water, and we wound up getting a 182 RG. The instructors there were awesome. They were just terrific. And my thought was, and you should never say this, but what could go wrong? I mean, these guys are awesome. They do great instruction on. What are the chances of having to gear up with all the stuff that we go through and all the meetings? I'm telling you, we did meetings about, don't forget to put the gear down, and then we'd actually kind of go through it. Anybody who's in that airplane, until it happened. And the guy geared up the airplane. And it's like, oh my gosh, that was the part that to me was like throwing water in your face. It's like, oh my gosh, now I don't have the availability of this 182. And that was kind of an unusual experience for me. I think it was unusual because of the fact that I'm usually skeptical, and I really wasn't at that point. I'm like, yeah, this plane is great. We do a lot of training. It's not going to happen to us. And it did. The other part I thought was unusual about that situation is they didn't total the airplane, which we thought they would. They said, no, we're not going to total the airplane. I was like, what? So we wound up we took that airplane. The cost, I think, was supposed to be 55 or 65, and we wound up spending 85 because no one ever repairs the airplane back to where it was, because those little projects you thought about, new headliners, new insulation, new radios. All of a sudden, you're not just fixing the engine, the gear, you're doing everything else. And it was quite expensive. I will say one thing, though. This is the cool thing about costs in a club. The person that had the accident wound up paying or loaning the money to the club to pay for the problem. So that was really, really cool. So that was kind of my unusual experience, was having a gear up landing in the club, and then not thinking there's no way they wouldn't actually total this airplane. So Bill, what kind of a unusual experience have you had in ownership, or something that you found was unusual about owning a certain
Yeah.
airplane?
So my situation now is unusual. My current day job, big flight school, what a lot of people are used to, reasonably modern airplanes, modern avionics, that sort of thing. And that's where most people train, is in that kind of environment. You might get into, once you decide to buy an airplane, something very different than your average flight school airplanes. What I own, listeners know that I own a 1953 170B with Stoll Bush modifications to it, very different. So I've had to learn to deal with all those aspects of an antique airplane, a modified airplane, that are a lot different than just your plain vanilla flight school 172. Parts, different kinds of maintenance, just everything's just a little bit different when you go back to, an airplane that was built before anybody knew who Elvis was.
That's a great description, by the way. Never thought of it that way. So yeah, that's great. It's interesting when you look at something that's antique and buying it. You think, there's a lot of things that that how hard could it be to get? But I've had an airplane where you couldn't get parts. There's nothing matched up, and that starts to be an issue there. It's just getting any kind of a steering mechanism that could be a pain. But Tom, what have you found? I know you haven't owned an airplane, but you know a lot of people with airplanes. And what have you seen that was unusual or unusual experience?
Yeah, and I've never purchased an airplane myself, but I've helped lots of people buy airplanes. And I think the unusual thing from a layman's standpoint when I got into that was the amount of patience that you need to have to buy an airplane. Because it's like, you want to go buy a nice fancy new car, you go down to the dealership, you pick out the one you like, you sign the paperwork, you hand over the check, they give you the keys, and out the door you go. And it didn't work that way with an airplane. We found airplanes, and then, oh wait, we found the one we love. Let's go check it out. Oh wait, we got to do a pre-buy first. Nope, this is not the airplane you want. We found another one, and then another one. And then finally, when we finally got to a plane that we wanted that passed the pre-buy, it's like, oh no, wait, you can't fly it yet. We got to get it home first. Wait, we got to register it first. Oh, wait, we got to get insurance for it first. And, all of these different entities that we had to deal with along the way, have their due diligence to do as well. So it takes time. And I realized just how much patience as an airplane purchaser to an airplane owner that you'd have to have. And I saw that as unusual. But, like I said, from a layman's standpoint, it's like, this is America. You find someplace you something you want, you're down, you buy it, you take it home, and you get to use it. It doesn't quite work that way with an airplane that I've found. So yeah, I would say that was the unusual piece of it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do that, if you go out and just buy something, boy, you're in for a wild ride. I've had a friend of mine bought an airplane, a King Air, for $200,000. He spent well over $200,000, and it didn't fly. And then he wound up selling it again. So good point, though. A lot of people don't realize you got to have a lot of patience. It's not like buying a piece of real estate, that's for sure. So Leslie, how about you? What unusual experience have you had with ownership?
Well, I would say I've got a lot of them, but probably one that makes people say, "Oh, wow, I never realized that," is we would get the question from laymen all the time, how do you get these planes out to Hawaii when we had our flight school out there? And, somehow they've got to make it across the water. And a lot of people just think you can hop in a 172 and fly it from San Francisco, over to Maui. No, it doesn't happen like that. There have been a couple recently. There's a flight school over in Honolulu where they did find a ferry pilot. They were able to make the fuel and everything work, and he flew a 172 over there. But we purchased one of our 172s from some friends of ours in Arkansas. They had bought it. They had it for a couple of years. Their son was building time in it while he was at Embry-Riddle. And I had always told them, if you ever want to sell that plane, we want to buy it. Well, the day came where they bought a Cirrus and they were ready to sell this 172. So we went through all the process and everything, purchased the 172. So what we had to do is he flew it over to Dawson Aircraft in Arkansas. Great folks, by the way, if you ever are looking to do something like this. And they tore the airplane apart down to the fuselage, took the wings off, took one of the main gear off, and the tail off, and then very carefully packaged it in a 40-foot container, very carefully with, I mean, we probably spent $2,000 or $3,000 just in the material to pack it in the container. Then it got taken on an 18-wheeler to Memphis, where it got put on rail. It was on rail to the port in Los Angeles. Then it had a long boat ride over to Hawaii. We flew one of the mechanics from Dawson Aircraft over to Hawaii once it made it on the ground there. And so the same mechanic that oversaw the project of the teardown, he put the plane back together again for us and had a little vacation out of it. Anyway, so people are just amazed, and it was always fun when you'd see a big shipping container show up on the ramp over there in Maui, because you knew a new aircraft or a helicopter was arriving. So everybody would gather around, you'd open the doors and see the all the pieces that had to be put back together. A lot of people don't realize that 9 times out of 10, that's how you ship an aircraft internationally.
Yeah, wow, that actually is a good description. There's a lot of shippers here in Lakeland where I'm located with aircraft, and that is amazing what they do. I mean, the different things that they think about when they're shipping the aircraft, whether they put it in a container, etc. One of the guys here has been doing it for 50 years. It's phenomenal. But that's something that people don't realize. I mean, that's very unusual, is actually getting your airplane from point A to point B. But it all can be shipped, or it might be flown. So that was cool, Leslie. That's awesome. Thinking about being on an island like that. And that was really cool watching that person fly over to Hawaii. I don't know if anybody watched that. That was really awesome. Airline pilots were like cheering him on 121.5. It was kind of really cool to see that. Anyway, so that's it. The good, the bad, the unusual. We do have something that's really important to us, and that's the picks of the week. Remember, all the things that we do in this post flight, in these picks of the week, are things that we really believe in. We're not just doing it because they might be sponsors, et cetera, but it's something that we truly believe in, these products, and it's something that we suggest to you that you might want to take a look at as far as actually, maybe buying, using their services, et cetera. Leslie, I'm going to start with you, because we're on that topic of airplane ownership. So let's start with your pick of the week.
My pick of the week is my third favorite podcast behind the Stuck Mic AvCast and the Aviation Careers podcast, and that is the Airplane Owner Maintenance podcast with Dean Showalter. And I know he's a friend of the show. He's been on before, but since we're on this topic, I wanted to bring it up again. Dean is a very experienced aircraft mechanic. He's also a commercial pilot. He's flying around in a King Air presently, loving that. But when he talks about technical maintenance issues on his podcast, I'm not a mechanic. I know just enough to be dangerous, but he gets on a basic level that anybody can understand. And there's always some really great practical takeaways from his podcast. So you can check that out. It's on most every podcast app, or you can go to his website. It's Airplane Owner Maintenance Podcast.
Well, thanks, Leslie. Love Dean Showalter. Love to have him back on the show. He's a terrific guy, too. But I love his explanations. So, Bill, what is your pick of the week, Bill?
It is, and yeah, shout out to Dean, too. He works on our airplane sometimes down there in Shenandoah. So we talked early in the podcast about some flight training and flight instructors. And mine is, I'll pick up the ball for Russ again because he's not here, and it's going to be a book, right? This time it's a book. Our friend, friend of the show, Aaron, gifted me a copy a little while ago. CFI the Book, hilarious book by a fellow named Alex Stone from Michigan. It's fiction, supposedly, right? His description: an underpaid, overworked flight instructor cheats death while attempting to teach a cast of incompetent student pilots in a skeezy South Florida flight school. It's satire, but is it really? A lot of fun. Anybody that's done any flight instruction will enjoy this. Really funny book.
That sounds like an awesome book. CFIthebook.com is where you can find that. You can find it in the show notes here. I'll go next on the picks of the week. For those that are interested in flying and they don't think they can get scholarships, there are a lot of non-traditional scholarships out there for people that are looking to get into this as a hobby, not so much a career. And those you can find in the scholarships guide that we have in our sister podcast, aviationcareerspodcast.com/scholarships. And you can actually get one of those for free because of our sponsor, and that's Stratus Financial. And Stratus Finance helps those people that want to move forward in a career in aviation. So if you know somebody who's thinking about a career in aviation, or somebody who's already involved in trying to get their training done and needs money, needs help with finance, Stratus Financial is the way to go. Stratus Finance, and you can get a free scholarships guide that we talked about for some of those non-traditional scholarships. You're 50 years old, you're looking to get your instrument rating. They have scholarships in there. They're giving them away for free using the coupon code STRATUS. And to get a free one, go to stuckmikeavcast.com/free and use Stratus as that code. So that's my pick of the week, non-traditional scholarships for those of us that want to move forward in our actual hobby in aviation. And finally, Tom, what is your pick of the week?
Yep. So in the vein of not being an aircraft owner, I chose the AOPA Flying Club Finder. So, and the reason for that is that, like, because I don't own an aircraft, I still have to fly. And I, because of what I do for a living, I tend to get around the country a whole bunch. So this finder, I've used it a bunch of times to get into an area and find a club that may be nearby, and depends on the rules of the club, but a lot of them don't necessarily need a big buy-in to be a part of the club. They generally do a checkout and then do a per hour rate. So I've found clubs before where I could literally just go out and, it's a lot of paperwork, because you got to do all your pilot history and all insurance and everything else. But once you could get past that, you can do a checkout flight and they'll make the plane available to you. And sometimes it's just a checkout flight. It's flying in an area low and slow that I've never been before, and it tends to work out really nice. So since I can't bring my own plane there, I use this club finder, and it works. So I present it as a pick of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wonderful thing. All those tools there. By the way, we have the links at the bottom of the show notes here for AOPA's Club Finder. Also, all the information they have on buying airplanes. Highly recommend going out there and checking that out. But most importantly, come visit us. StuckMikeAvCast@gmail.com if you have questions. Go to our Facebook page if you have any kind of comments or you want to share your knowledge on some of the things as far as aircraft ownership that maybe we didn't talk about. Upcoming events, of course, the Redbird Migration in Denver, Colorado. Hats off to Bill English and the awards that they're getting there from AOPA. And also hats off to Leslie as far as award for the scholarship. I think that's absolutely terrific. And don't forget, we're going to be on the campus at Sun and Fun from April 1st through the 6th, 2025. We're still doing that every year. But before you hit stop on this podcast, do me a favor, get out there and just keep that passion alive for aviation. You may not be able to go fly today, but I'm sure you can find a YouTube video. You can walk to the airport, watch planes take off and land, and that's actually what I'm going to do right after this podcast. So get out there. I really highly recommend just doing something today to keep that passion for aviation alive. Well, we'll talk to you next episode. Safe flying out there.